Welcome back to another podcast here on Free Will Photos. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is a little bit different than what I typically talk about, which is editing photos. Today, we're going to talk about the beauty of not editing your images after you photograph them. So, we're really going to be focusing on getting things right in camera. And this is actually probably the best way to learn photography is to shoot JPEG only and really master using your camera, using the tool that you are out there using to capture the images that you want to capture. When you rely too heavily on post production, you tend to get lazy. I know I do. I definitely get lazy when it comes to lighting and composition because in my mind, I'm always thinking, well, in post production, I can just re edit the image the way that I expected to do it in the field instead of taking the time to get it right in the field. So, my challenge to everyone is for a week, maybe 2 weeks, to shoot JPEG only. Now, I know that that is counterproductive to what I typically talk about, where we're always looking at getting the best images in post production. And I think that you can go that much further when you master the skills of capturing things right in camera. So, I got a few things that I want to cover about capturing things right in camera and then having the beauty of the unedited image. So, let's go ahead and dive right into those. So, the first thing is the beauty of the subject. When you're not trying to focus on enhancing the image in post production, you're really in the moment capturing the subject. That could be a person, that could be a landscape around you, that could be a macro item from a bug, an insect to a plant. Doesn't really matter. When you pay more attention to capturing your subject at the time that you're pressing the shutter button, the better your images will become hands down every single time. For many of the photographers that I've talked to, my mentors, the people who taught me photography in the beginning, and YouTubers, whatever, they all, like every last one of them, I haven't found one that hasn't at least told me take a little bit of time and pay attention to the image you are capturing at the time that you're pressing the shutter button. Because when you do that, that translates into a great image. Now, obviously, there's other things that come into play. Sometimes you just have to press the button really fast because the image that you're trying to capture is a fleeting moment. I'm thinking of like wildlife photographers where the animal may only be in the light that you want to capture the animal in for maybe 2 seconds. So you're just going to photograph whatever settings your camera is at. And I think this is where it becomes important to understanding how to set up the camera. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But the point here is you want to capture the moment and the essence of the moment as opposed to capturing just like something that you're going to take into post production and you're like, okay, I'm not even going to focus on getting a good composition, setting the right camera settings for the scene in front of me. And again, we're going to talk about camera settings here in a bit. But the point is, you want to look at the moment and say, yes, how do I capture that? And when you do that, then you're going to do a little bit better overall. I know that I do. My photography has improved when I shot JPEG and when I shoot JPEG. In fact, I just went on a family trip down to the beach, and for a majority of that trip, and actually, I think all of that trip, I shot JPEG. I think I shot RAW plus JPEG because I do like having the ability to capture raw images, but at the same time, I'm only working with the JPEG images in post production, and I'm not even really editing as much as I'm just cropping to get rid of things that don't need to really be there. So I'm spending far less time in the post production phase And I think this is critical when you want to stay creative in the process of editing your images or producing images, I should say, because you're not worried about did I pull the right shadow slider or did I add a curves adjustment filter or whatever it may be. You're really just like, hey, does this actually tell the story of the moment that I was trying to capture? And that's what's so beautiful about unedited images. Now, if you're sold on the idea of not having to edit your images, then let's go ahead and talk a little bit deeper about how do you set up your camera in order to get to this point. Because if you don't understand how to use your camera, then that's the problem. All right. And if you're on an iPhone, then okay, or a mobile device or whatever, this is perfectly fine. There's tons of camera apps out there that are going to allow you to have more control. But even, at least I can speak for the iPhone, even the iPhone application has the ability to adjust your exposure value or exposure compensation. If you just tap on the screen and then drag down after you've set your focus, you will be able to establish your exposure compensation. And, that's going to make the image either darker or brighter. Now, if you are on a more sophisticated camera, I'll say it like that, then you're going to be able to adjust your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO, which are the three fundamentals of establishing a great exposure. But there's also some ideas of using spot metering if you're photographing something in shadow, or perhaps using a different focusing type. Maybe you need to use, and I mean, honestly, if you're not able to get the focus the way that you want it to be, then that's probably a whole different challenge, discussion, issue, whatever you want to talk about. I don't think we're going to get there today, but using your camera appropriately or knowing how to set your camera appropriately for the scene that's in front of you is important. So, where should you begin? First, if your camera allows it, set it for RAW plus JPEG, especially if you are a RAW shooter. Now, I'm imagining that many people who listen to this podcast, at least based off of the subscribers to my YouTube channel, the Free Will Photos YouTube channel, by the way, if you're not subscribed over there, you may want to go check it out. It might be exactly what you're looking for in order to learn photography and photo editing a little bit faster so you can get your creative vision out into the world that much faster. It's completely free. YouTube link is down in the show notes of this podcast. But the point here isn't so much about editing the raw file. It's about having security, all right? In the event that you've overexposed your JPEG, you could go to the raw image and you can edit that. And that's the only reason why you want to shoot raw plus JPEG. Most of the time when I do this, I focus on the JPEG images, especially when I know that I got a good exposure right out of camera. I don't need to worry about going into On1 or Lightroom or Photoshop or any of those editing softwares because I got it right in camera as far as the exposure goes. All I'm focusing on is cropping, all right? So the first step is RAW plus JPEG. The second step is setting your ISO, because if you are on, again, the settings that I'm giving here are specifically for people using DSLRs and mirrorless cameras right now. I'm like 99% confident if you are on a modern DSLR or mirrorless camera, you're going to have the ability to set auto ISO. And auto ISO is probably the best technique to get your exposure right where you want it to be. Now, this is going to be something that, and I'm recommending that you have your camera set to manual. So I guess we should back up. After you have your camera set to RAW plus JPEG, you want to go into your manual mode. All right. Don't worry about aperture priority or shutter priority. I'm not worried about those. I want you to still have control because I think that a part of getting it right in camera is making sure that you have the control over your ISO, shutter speed, and your aperture independently without having to worry about exposure compensation, right? You are going to make your exposure compensation manually, right? With that being said, you want to set your ISO to auto ISO because most cameras, they don't give as much digital noise as we used to get with previous cameras. And if you're not familiar with digital noise, don't worry about it. It's just this grainy texture that comes over the image. Sometimes there's color splotchiness, and it makes the image look a little weird, but that's typically after you get above a certain threshold. So most of the time, auto ISO, if you set it right in camera, you can make it, you can limit it to 3200 ISO or 6400 ISO, but I wouldn't be afraid to push the cameras beyond that. I have images that I can use that I shot at 40,000 ISO. And based off of the camera that you have, there's also noise reduction that gets baked into your JPEG files. So not only are you able to shoot at higher ISOs, the cameras are also doing a little bit of computation to remove some of that digital noise. So gone are the days, at least to the best of my understanding, that you have to really concern yourself about shooting above 1600 or 800 ISO. Right? You can go way above that. I know that I've gone way above that. The more important thing is that you have the exposure right in camera. And that really comes down to understanding how to read your histogram. So that's going to be the next step. After you have auto ISO set up on your camera, you definitely want to have the histogram showing on the back of your screen or through your viewfinder. And the reason is that's the best way of telling where your exposure is in camera. Like there's no other tool on the camera that is more important to telling you where your exposure is outside of the histogram. So you may have to do some searching on your camera model to figure out how to get the histogram to show up on your computer, or I'm sorry, on your camera, which, I mean, heck, cameras are tiny computers. But once you have that histogram up, the goal is to expose as far to the right side of that histogram that you can get comfortably that also represents the image well. All right. If you are photographing something and that image is not coming out the way that you want it to, and you want it to be a little bit darker, then by all means, move that histogram over to the left. And you do that by adjusting either your shutter speed or your aperture. All right. I typically like to do it by shutter speed. Now, obviously, if you want to get motion blur in there, then you may need to go with aperture. And then, of course, if you end up with something where you're like, well, I want something to have a shallow depth of field and I want it to have motion blur. And the only way that I can lower the exposure to make it darker is to bring down my ISO. And there is another method that we'll talk about here in a second. And if you find yourself in a situation where you want motion blur and a shallow depth of field, and the only way to get that is to bring down the ISO, then go for it. Bring down your ISO until you get to whatever it needs to be. If that's 60, 100, 400, 200, who knows? Doesn't matter. If you get it, then you got it and you're good. Now, let's say you bring your ISO down to your lowest ISO that you can absolutely get it to. In most cameras, that's like 100 for the base, and then there's like extended ISOs that allow you to go into like 50. But that's not a discussion for today's video or episode, whatever. You may want to look at some neutral density filters. And essentially, what a lot of people say these things are sunglasses for your camera. And what that really allows you to do is it blocks out more light. So that way you can keep your aperture open, because the way that you get that blurry or that shallow depth of field, the blurry background or shallow depth of field, is by adding in or having your aperture set to a lower value like 1.2, 1.4, 1.8. But if you're outside and you have a lot of light that's outside, well, you're going to overexpose your image, because what ends up happening is that aperture opens up to allow more light to hit your sensor. So you need another way of blocking that light, because if your shutter speed, especially if you want motion blur, if your shutter speed is too low, that's also allowing more light, because it's allowing the sensor to be exposed to the light, leaving your shutter up a little bit longer. And then your ISO is already down to the lowest level. So when you put on these ND filters, what it does is it blocks off that light and it compensates for a stop. So if you buy a 10 stop neutral density filter, you're going to get an equivalent amount of stops of light to help you, control whatever that light is for your scene. Now, if that's way too technical, don't worry about it. If you're like, Chris, I'm completely lost, or you didn't do a great job at explaining that, I apologize, but don't worry about it. Here's what you need to know. If you want to get a certain look and you're not getting it, then do the research. Go online. There's plenty of resources. Heck, you can even ask me, Chris, I'm trying to do this, and here's what keeps happening every time, and I will do my best to answer that question for you. Another great resource that we have available to us now in 2025 is artificial intelligence. So you can literally go to ChatGPT, Google Gemini, whatever AI tool that you want to go to, and you can explain your issue, and the AI will help answer those questions. And guess what? Most of these apps are on our phones. So you could be out in the field and you could be like, okay, my camera is giving me a hard time. You can literally talk to ChatGPT or Google Gemini and say, I'm using a Canon R6 Mark II and my images are coming out too bright. I've lowered my ISO as far as I could. My shutter speed is this. You give it camera settings. And Google Gemini or ChatGPT, whatever AI tool you're using, it'll turn around and give you feedback on how you can make your image better. Just that simple. So if you don't know how to use your camera, you can literally talk to these AIs and ask them to give you feedback. If you tell it the model of camera that you have, it will give you feedback on how you can make your image look a little bit better to get that exposure that you want. All right. So those are the first two things. First one, capture the moment. The second one, get your camera settings just right. And to get the camera settings right, you may have to throw in some accessories. All right. The last thing that we'll talk about for this particular idea of not editing images is, what do you do with them once you get them back into your computer? Well, you go to the basics of photo editing. All right. And what that means is, when back in the day when photo editors, and I'm not talking about software, I'm talking about people that looked at a series of images and then they put them in sequences, they removed images from a collection, whatever, that was called photo editing. All right. You become that type of photo editor when you don't have to be a photo modifier or color corrector or anything of the sort. And we didn't even talk about white balance. Shoot on auto white balance. If you want to shoot at a different Kelvin temperature, then by all means, go ahead and set your white balance. But nonetheless, with all of these cameras today, there's so many creative styles inside of them. You can literally get a look that you want right out of camera. So then when you get back into your computer and you dump all your images into a folder, into All-in-One Photo Raw, Lightroom, whatever photo editing software that you're used to using, or, I should say photo cataloging tool. For many of you, that is your Explorer or the Finder. I don't recommend this, but I'm not going to talk about that today. All right. Once you have your images in there, what you can do is start to sort through them. Figure out what images you like and what images you don't like. And here's where, some people may really write me off. If you haven't written me off already, you may write me off after this. Delete the photos that you don't want. Delete them. Just straight up destroy them. Let them go away into cyberspace, ether, whatever. Get rid of them. And that's hard. But what this teaches you is to be deliberate when you are photographing, to capture the moment, because you know that you're not going to keep all of your photos. And in the editing space, there's a term called you have to kill your darlings. And because you press the button, you feel some level of responsibility to preserve the work that you created. And it's hard to go and delete that work after you've just spent all this time making the image in your camera, and then you get it back. And I'm talking about deleting images that could be good otherwise, but you got to get rid of them. Just delete them. Destroy them. Let them go. Like Elsa, let it go. It's tough. That is the hardest part of working like this, especially for me, because I photograph family moments. So when I go to delete these JPEGs, because you could keep the RAWs, so you got a little bit of leeway, right? You got a little bit of insurance if you're shooting RAW plus JPEG. You can keep the RAWs, but I'm talking specifically the JPEGs. I want to cull through my entire shoot and select just the ones that are the best out of, if you shot 100 images, I may only keep 20. So 80% of my images are getting deleted. That is hard because you feel like, well, what if I make a mistake? At least that's what I thought. And I have made some mistakes. I have regretted deleting some of my images. But you know what? It's helped me pay a little bit more attention of what I'm doing when I'm photographing. So when I get back into the computer and I know that I'm going to be faced with having to delete images, it's a little bit easier for me to get through because I know the images that I wanted, I've captured them. What it's also taught me is to shoot less and get good quality images. Because unless you're photographing an event or something where you need hundreds of images of the same thing, you probably only need 1-2 images max to tell the story. And what's important, especially if you're photographing something that's changing light, what's important is knowing when the max light is going to hit, because the best light is going to hit. Because up until then, all of the images that you take, they're just practice for that one image that's about to come up. And it's good to practice it's good to set your exposure. It's good to set your framing, make sure that you're good to go. So that way, when the light does come, you press that button. But all of the images before that are trash. Even though you may like them, they may look cool, they may be creative, they're really trash. Because the image that you are really going for is that one. And sometimes, I know this to be true. Sometimes the image you thought you wanted isn't the image that you actually wanted. It's one of the other images that are leading up to it. So then you're faced with the other option of trashing the photo that you were prepared for, that you were preparing for. Now you got to trash that one. And that is even more difficult. It's okay. It's just photography. And the more you do it, the better you get at capturing the moments when you're holding the camera. Now, this is not me trying to convince people not to spend time in photo editing. This is just me simply saying to get better images to edit, doing this drill of photographing things raw and unedited in a way that you are still proud of the work that you've completed, but you didn't have to spend 5, 10, 20, whatever the time is. You didn't have to spend any extra time in the editing process to really get the look that you wanted because you already got it in camera. And that's the whole point of today's episode. Get it as close as you can to right in camera. And if it's a little messy, that's okay. When you go back and you look at some of the best photos, the photos that have won awards, and I'm not talking about the modern era of awards, all right? I'm talking like if you go back into the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, maybe, I don't know. But before digital photography, photos were not perfect. And that's a topic for a whole nother day because we have gotten into this idea that photos have to be this immaculate thing, but they really don't. They should be contextual to the thing that we're photographing, but they don't have to be immaculate. So take the time to learn your gear and to capture the moments that happen right before you so you don't have to spend your time in the computer trying to correct them to get the look that you thought you wanted. Hopefully you found some value in this episode. I want to know your thoughts about not editing images and just working with raw, unfiltered, unedited moments that are genuine and really represent the subject and the story well. So with that, I say thank you for listening to this episode. If you got questions, leave it in the comment section below. If you want to get in contact with me, all of my contact info is in the description box or show notes. So please reach out. I'd love to talk with you. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment. Let's talk about it. Unedited images. Are they the thing that you would expect them to be? So until the next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.